History loves simple stories. Heroes and villains, hunters and prey, victors who stride forward, and victims who fade into footnotes. For centuries, the Vikings were written as the unstoppable force of Europe, the terror of coastlines, the masters of the sea, the men who bent kingdoms to their will. But history has a habit of polishing legends and burying the moments when those legends broke. This is not a story about Viking glory. This is the story of the day fear crossed the Baltic Sea and the hunters learned what it felt like to be hunted. 0 survivors. That was the only number that mattered once the smoke cleared above the cold, gray waters of the Baltic Sea. This was no merchant fleet lost to a storm. This was 60 Swedish war drakkers, the sharp edge of the most feared military machine of its age, reduced to splintered timber and bloated corpses drifting with the tide in less than an hour. The Vikings, Europe's apex predators, the men who had burned Paris and stood before the walls of Constantinople, did not die here fighting an empire or a Christian king. They died screaming, not in battle fury, but in terror, facing something they did not understand until it was already too late. The history books lied to us. They sold the Viking as the invincible wolf, eternally hunting sheep. But on the eastern shores of the Baltic, in the dense forests of what we now call Estonia and Latvia, the wolves met bears. Tribes who did not fear the Norse, and who learned how to hunt them. The Curonians, the Oeselians, names that mean nothing today, but in the 11th century were enough to make the kings of Sweden and Denmark wake in the night drenched in sweat. To understand the panic of that summer morning, you must first understand the arrogance that came before it. For nearly 300 years, the Baltic had been treated as a Swedish lake. The kings of Svealand looked east and saw only one thing: a warehouse of slaves. They crossed the sea, burned coastal villages, loaded their ships with amber and captives, and sailed home to drink mead and boast of easy victories. It was routine. It was profitable. It was effortless. And like every empire in decline, they made one fatal mistake. They underestimated how quickly their victims could learn. At first, the change went unnoticed. A Viking ship that never returned. A Danish patrol that vanished near the island of Saaremaa. In Sigtuna, Sweden's great trading capital, leaders blamed bad weather. Bad luck. Anything but the truth. They refused to see what was happening across the water, that in hidden shipyards tucked between Curonian inlets, the so-called barbarians were building ships of their own. Not crude copies, but lighter, flat-bottomed vessels designed not for open seas, but for shallow waters, rocky archipelagos, and narrow channels where heavy Swedish drakkers ran aground. The blindness ended on a summer Tuesday. The lookout at the fortress on the island of Halland did not sound the alarm, because what he saw on the horizon made no sense. These are not red and white, striped square sails. The ships carried dark sails and moved without formation. They came fast, chaotic, violent, cutting through the water like a swarm. They were Oeselians, and they were not there to trade. The so-called Battle of Halland was no battle at all. It was an execution. The Baltic raiders did not seek honorable combat. That luxury belongs to men who believe they will live forever. Instead, they used naval guerrilla tactics. Iron hooks flew into the hulls of anchored Swedish ships, not to board them, but to pull close enough to hurl burning pitch, baskets of venomous snakes, and pots of quicklime onto the decks. Panic consumed the Swedish crews. Men who had slaughtered Saxons and Franks without hesitation now leapt into the sea in full armor, choosing drowning over what crawled and burned through the smoke. But the true horror was not death. It was what awaited survivors. Vikings feared dying without a sword in hand. It meant no Valhalla. But they feared the Curonians more for what they did to the living. Legend spoke of deep forest sanctuaries where captured Norse were not enslaved, but sacrificed. Baltic priests reading the future in Swedish entrails. Knowing your end would not be a glorious grave, but a blood-soaked stone altar in a foreign forest shattered Viking morale faster than any blade. News of the disaster reached Sigtuna 2 days later. A fisherman found wreckage washed ashore, bodies pinned head down in the sand with ash spears. The message was unmistakable. The Baltic no longer belonged to them. King Canute Eriksson locked himself inside his fortress, facing an existential crisis. A king who could not protect his own shores could not rule. Rival clans would smell weakness. Authority would collapse. He needed a swift victory. He needed to crush the eastern pirates and restore the natural order. So he made the decision that sealed thousands of lives. Instead of fortifying the coast, he ordered the remaining royal fleet, the Ladang, assembled for a full eastern offensive. Curonia would burn. A lesson would be taught. 300 ships, 10,000 men, steel flashing beneath the July sun as the fleet sailed from the Stockholm archipelago. Priests blessed the sails. Wives waved from the docks. It looked like triumph, like the return of old glory. But one detail escaped the king's notice. Spies. Sigtuna was an international trading city. Rus merchants, Germans, Wends, Balts. Among the smiling traders paying their taxes were men counting ships, measuring supplies, memorizing departure dates. As the Swedish fleet sailed east, a single small vessel slipped away in the opposite direction, hugging the southern coast. Its message to Curonia was simple. The nest is empty. The she-wolf has left her cubs alone. The Swedish fleet sailed into a trap, just not the one they expected. They anticipated resistance on Curonian beaches, shield walls, battle lines. Instead, they found nothing. Empty villages, missing cattle, poison wells, a land stripped bare. Confused, Swedish generals ordered their men inland. That was the moment the war truly changed. As 10,000 Vikings marched heavily through the forests, chasing an enemy that dissolved like fog. 300 kilometers away across the sea, a black-sailed armada emerged from the morning mist off the Swedish coast. They were not hunting an army. They were going for the heart. Sigtuna, Sweden's crown jewel, was defended by old men and children. At dawn on Lake Mälaren, the fog usually breaks gently. That morning, it shattered under the rhythm of 1,000 oars. The harbor barriers, built to stop heavy drakkars, were useless. Curonian and Oeselian ships slid over submerged obstacles like snakes over fallen branches. There were no negotiations, only fire. Within 15 minutes, Sigtuna's main gate was burning. Baltic warriors surged ashore, lightly armored, brutally fast. No heavy mail, no hesitation. By the time Swedish forces in Curonia realized something was wrong, their capital was already dying. Inside the cathedral, Archbishop Johannes hid at the altar with women and children. They believed the church would protect them, that even barbarians would respect God's house. They were wrong. The cathedral doors fell. Johannes was beheaded on the altar steps. His blood soaked the sacred cloth. It was not random violence, it was a political message. And the humiliation continued. The invaders dismantled Sigtuna's bronze gates, masterpieces of Swedish craftsmanship, and carried them away. They did not just steal metal, they stole pride. By noon, the city was erased. Smoke darkened the sky 20 kilometers away. Survivors fled into forests, watching their world collapse behind them. The Pax Suessica was over. When King Canute finally ordered retreat, his army was starving, lost, and psychologically broken. But when they reached the coast, they found their fleet burning. 50 ships aflame, guards dead, black arrows in their throats. Then the messenger arrived, shaking, ash-stained, broken. Sigtuna is gone. Silence fell heavier than any shield wall. The return voyage would not be a retreat. It would be a hunt. And on the Baltic Sea, fear has nowhere to hide. The fog lifted in mid-afternoon and revealed the nightmare. They were not alone. Small, fast vessels appeared on the flanks, painted in muted grays and blues to melt into the water itself. They did not charge head-on. The Baltic warriors had studied Viking naval warfare carefully. They knew that boarding a drakkar packed with heavy, armored fighters was suicide. So they did something new, something the Norse would call cowardly, but history would later call brilliant. They used speed and fire. Curonian boats streaked past the Swedish transports, so close that the painted faces of the rowers were clearly visible. As they passed, they hurled clay pots filled with boiling fat and flaming pitch. They weren't trying to kill the crew. They were aiming for the sails. Within minutes, panic tore through the Swedish formation. A ship without sails is nothing more than a floating coffin. Fire at sea is a sailor's oldest terror. There is nowhere to run. Only two choices remain: burn or drown. The ship of Jarl Wolf, one of Uppsala's most feared veterans, was the first to break formation. He tried to turn and ram his attackers, but his vessel was too slow. The Estonian craft circled him like wolves around a wounded elk, peppering the Swedish rowers with short spears. The great Drakkar drifted helplessly, spinning in place as its attackers dismantled it piece by piece, methodical, patient, never risking a single man in boarding combat. King Canute watched from his flagship, powerless. If he slowed to help, the entire fleet would be surrounded. He made the coldest decision of his life: keep sailing. Let the damaged ships fall behind. Let them be consumed so the rest might live. The screams of his men faded into the fog behind him, swallowed by fire and waves. When the Swedish coast finally emerged 2 days later, there were no cheers. The smell arrived first, thick, acrid, heavy with burned wood and rotting flesh, carried inland by the wind. As the fleet entered Sigtuna's bay, hardened warriors wept, not from grief, but from helpless rage. The city was not damaged. It had been gutted. The wooden docks where they had played as children were floating charcoal. Merchant houses stood empty. And above all, there was silence. Absolute silence. Canute stepped onto a beach coated in gray ash. With every step, his boots kicked up black clouds. He walked toward the shattered stone cathedral. Where bronze doors and sacred chants once stood, there was only darkness and flies. In a market square, survivors emerged from the forests and gathered around their king. They were filthy, starving, and they did not look at him with reverence. They looked at him with doubt. A king who cannot protect his home is not a king. He is just a man wearing an expensive helmet. Canute removed his helm and let it fall to the ground. The metallic clang echoed across the dead square. He knew this was not the end of the war. He knew the Curonians and Oeselians now smelled blood in the water. The Nordic giant had revealed its weakness. But victory carried an unexpected consequence. The Baltic tribes were not satisfied. Success sharpened their appetite. United, they felt unstoppable, and like so many victors before them, they made the classic mistake: overreaching ambition. They did not stop at the sea. They looked south toward a different enemy, one that did not fight for gold or land, but for something far more dangerous: God. The Knights of the Sword were watching, and unlike the Swedes, they did not underestimate anyone. As Sigtuna burned, a response was being forged behind stone walls in Germany. A crusade was forming, one that would make Viking raids look like children's games. The North mourned. The South awakened a monster. The Curonians and Oeselians believed all Western men were the same. They thought humiliating the Vikings meant defeating Europe itself. They were wrong. The Vikings were, at their core, glorified raiders, fighters driven by loot, pride, and family honor. Chaotic, human. The enemy, now fixing its gaze on the Baltic, sought none of that. It did not want gold. It did not want slaves. And most terrifying of all, it did not fear death. Rome had spoken. Pope Innocent III declared a crusade, not toward Jerusalem, but northward against the last pagans of Europe. And the spearhead of this invasion was not peasants with axes. It was the Livonian brothers of the sword, warrior monks, men who had renounced land, family, even their names, to become consecrated killing machines. They arrived at the mouth of the Daugava River, not to raid and leave, but to stay. When Baltic scouts first saw the German ships, they laughed. Heavy, slow, laden with stone and timber. Floating graves, they called them. Drunk on victory, the tribes attempted the same tactics: swift ambush, fire, retreat. But when they struck the settlement that would become Riga, they encountered something new. Stone, not wooden palisades that rot and burn, but walls of gray masonry. To the forest tribes, stone was alien technology. Arrows bounced harmlessly, axes dulled, and from above those walls, death fell with mechanical precision. The crossbow had arrived. A Viking bow demanded years of training. A warrior was born, not made. But a crossbow allowed a conscripted peasant to punch a bolt through the chest of the finest tribal fighter from 100 paces just by pulling a lever. When the Curonians first assaulted Riga's construction works, they did not hear war cries. They heard the dry hum of bolts and the wet sound of flesh tearing. Hundreds died without ever seeing their killers. The true terror came in open ground. Bishop Albert of Riga knew walls alone were not enough. Power had to be projected. God's strength had to be demonstrated. So he unleashed the Brothers of the Sword. Picture it. Light tribal warriors, fast, agile, dressed in leather and furs, accustomed to motion, to evasion. And facing them, a line of steel statues. Mounted knights on massive war horses, both rider and beast wrapped head to hoof in iron. There was no strategy, only physics. When the German heavy cavalry charged, the ground itself trembled. Chronicles described the sound as rolling thunder. Javelins struck armor and fell away like hail on stone. The impact was annihilating. The charge did not break the tribal line, it pulverized it. 600-kilogram horses crushed bodies beneath iron hooves. Long lances skewered 2 or 3 men at once. This was not battle, it was harvest. The same men who had driven Swedish kings into flight now panicked. Speed meant nothing if they could not close distance. Ferocity meant nothing against a moving wall of iron. Near the Daugava, the myth of Baltic invincibility died. The survivors fled into swamps, leaving thousands of corpses behind. But what terrified them most came afterward. The brothers did not celebrate. They did not drink. They did not loot. They cleaned their blades, said a short prayer, reformed ranks in total silence. That discipline chilled the tribal leaders more than any torture. These were men who felt no joy, no rage, only obedience. Yet humans adapt. In the deep forests of Lithuania and Semigalia, a war council gathered. Shamans and young warlords understood the truth. The old way of fighting was dead. If they were to survive the Iron Crusade, they had to evolve. They would unite. They would learn the enemy's technology. If stone and iron were God's weapons, then they would steal them from God. No more suicidal field battles. They would fight where heavy horses could not go. Into ice. Winter was coming, and Baltic winter forgives no one. At 30 degrees below zero, metal becomes torture. Steel freezes skin. Breath crystallizes in helmet grills. Still, the brothers marched. February 1236. The Grand Master of the Order, Voquin, made the fatal mistake of believing technology defeated nature. He saw frozen rivers not as traps, but as highways. He gathered a massive column. Teutonic Knights, Rus auxiliaries, German mercenaries, a 2-kilometer serpent of iron glittering beneath pale winter sun. They advanced into Semigalia, laughing, burning isolated farms to keep warm. They did not know they were being herded. Lithuanian scouts moved silently on wooden skis, wrapped in wolf skins, communicating with bird whistles. They did not strike, only watched. They waited. At the Saul Pass, the trap closed. A wide clearing covered in untouched snow, seemingly solid ground, hid a frozen bog beneath brittle ice. At dusk, the vanguard halted. A small line of warriors blocked the valley's only exit. Voquin ordered the charge. Crush them. God wills it. 500 knights lowered their lances. The earth shook, and then physics intervened. The ice cracked, not fully but enough. Horses plunged into freezing mud. Momentum died instantly. Legs snapped. Riders flew like overturned turtles into deep snow. Chaos erupted. From the forests, thousands of tribal warriors surged forward, gliding on snowshoes. They did not try to pierce armor. They crushed helmets with maces, dragged knights into icy water, and let their own weight drown them. Voquin fought like a demon until a Semigalian warrior severed his knee tendons with a sickle. He fell screaming not in pain, but rage. He never rose again. The massacre at Saul lasted less than an hour. Nearly 50 elite knights and over 2,000 soldiers lay dead. The Brothers of the Sword were decapitated in a single afternoon. But victory brought something more dangerous than celebration. Unity. Among the dead stood a man watching with cold, calculating eyes. His name was Mindaugas, and he understood that if they were to survive what came next, the old world had to die. That night, in the trembling torchlight, while his men stripped the fallen Germans of their valuable chainmail, Mindaugas began weaving a different kind of weapon, an idea. "Look," he told the other chiefs, pointing at the bodies. "They bleed like we do, they freeze like we do, and they will return with more." His voice was steady, almost practical. "If we stay tribes, they'll crush us one by one. If we become a fist, we become untouchable. Fear can unite men for a day. Ambition can bind them for generations." Mindaugas didn't promise survival, he promised a state. In the months that followed, he unified Lithuania with brutal clarity. Allies received gold and rank. Resistors received graves. No bargains, no half measures. From scattered clans, he forged the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, the only pagan power in the region strong enough to stare Christendom down. But Rome did not flinch. In Prussia, the Teutonic fortresses did not mourn. The defeat at Saul triggered mobilization. Pope Gregory IX dissolved the remnants of the Sword Brothers and merged them into the Teutonic Order, turning a local crusade into a machine of total war. Engineers arrived. Siege engines followed. Fanaticism hardened into policy. The Teutons understood they could not swallow Lithuania's forests quickly, so they aimed at oxygen, the eastern gateway of trade and influence, Novgorod. In 1242, they struck with confidence, taking Pskov with humiliating ease. Chains replaced councils. The Black Cross rose over the walls. The road to Novgorod seemed open. Yet Novgorod had a protector, Alexander, barely 20, later called Nevsky. He wasn't a dreamer. He was a calculator. He knew light militia would be meat under a Teutonic cavalry charge on firm ground. A knight on a war horse was a 1-ton missile. You didn't block it, you avoided it. So he chose the ice. On April 5th, as spring weakened the surface of Lake Peipus, Alexander formed his army on the frozen lake. Crow ice, locals warned, solid-looking, deadly. The Teutonic commander smiled. Flat ground, perfect for the boar snout wedge, steel at the point, infantry protected behind, meant to smash the enemy center and split the line. Alexander offered them the center on purpose. His weakest militia stood there as bait. His cavalry and archers waited on the flanks. The charge began, armored hooves pounding ice like thunder. The wedge crashed into the Russian center. Militiamen died by the dozen. The line buckled, and the Teutons surged forward, drunk on momentum. That was the trap. Russian wings closed. Horse archers targeted mounts, not armor. The wedge stalled, packed too tightly to turn. And then the lake groaned. Cracks spidered beneath concentrated weight, steel, horses, and arrogance all in one place. When the first knight vanished into black water, panic ignited. Plate and mail turned tanks into anchors. Horses flailed, riders sank, and the ice swallowed screams. The retreat became a hunt. Alexander's light cavalry pursued for kilometers, pulling men down and finding gaps at throat and armpit. By dusk, Teutonic elites were dead or captured. The battle on the ice drew a hard line. The Catholic push east had slammed into Orthodox resolve. From the forests, Mindaugas watched two giants bleed. He understood power was shifting. Brute force had limits. Technology could fail. Politics could win. He sent envoys to the Pope. He would accept baptism and a crown on his terms. It was a geopolitical checkmate. A papal anointed king could not be crusade without scandal. In 1253, Mindaugas was crowned king of Lithuania, the first and only. For a moment, the Baltic held its breath. But peace there is always temporary. Pagan traditionalists seethed. The Teutonic order plotted, humiliated yet hungry. The truce was not an ending, it was time to sharpen knives. In 1260, at Derb, the lie broke open. Forced Curonian and Estonian auxiliaries turned mid-battle and struck their Teutonic masters from within. Chaos tore the crusader line apart. Knight brothers fell, banners sank into mud and blood, and the shockwave ignited uprisings across the region. Mindaugas ripped the cross from his neck, expelled priests, and burned churches he had ordered built. "The experiment is over," he declared. Lithuania would not be Rome's vassal. What began as Viking arrogance on Baltic shores ended as a new reality. The forest tribes did not vanish. They evolved into an empire, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, stretching toward the Black Sea, defying neighbors, blocking the Golden Horde, and breaking the crusader